All right, we're live. Sam O'Keefe, welcome to the Future of Fitness.
Thanks for having me, Eric. Glad to be here.
Yeah, there's you, my friend, have found yourself at a very interesting time, at a very interesting intersection of fitness, health, insurance, new monetary opportunities. And I got the chance to talk to you at a couple events already this year, right? So Connected Health and Fitness, HFA, which was last week, kind of date our recording here, but I've enjoyed our conversations. You guys have definitely been garnering a lot of interest from the industry, not just fitness, but wellness and a lot of different categories. We'll talk about that. So I'm excited to have the opportunity to maybe inform people about the opportunity, maybe dispel some of the confusions around HSA, FSA access. So we're going to get into all of that. So stay tuned here, people. Buckle up. But Sam, let's start with this. Let's start with your background. It's an unusual background into our industry, and we'll start with that because that'll set the table.
Yeah, absolutely. I often get told that my background is, quote, interesting because I have worn a lot of different hats in my career. To bring it to Flex and why I'm so excited to be able to go to events like Connected Health and Fitness and HFA, it really stems from my background and my passion for sports and for exercise. I grew up playing everything under the sun. I played 3 sports in college. As an adult, I'm a CrossFitter, I ski, I hike, I do all the things. It's such a huge part of my identity. And I've never had an opportunity before to really bring that into my professional life. And so I think when you look at my resume, there's a question like, okay, this seems like maybe a hard pivot or like a really net new thing. And I just love the fact that finally now kind of this kind of personal interest and passion I'm able to bring into my work and have that be something I live and breathe every day. Yeah, that's some context. Before starting Flex, I was most recently, at a fintech company along with my co-founder. We were building AML and fraud software. So we kind of had our foot in the door there. I've had stints at places like Google where I was a chief of staff to Diane Green, who was the CEO of the cloud business over there. So I've done kind of like cloud and developer engagement. I've been at TechCrunch, a media company, working with a ton of startups. And so, yeah, really glad to be at a point to take all that experience and actually combine it with my personal interest here.
Yeah, amazing. So you started this almost 2 years ago, right, Flex?
We're coming up on 2 years. Yeah, which is crazy, in June officially.
So how did you identify this? Like, where was the moment you're like, okay, I can build a significant business around this? What was that aha moment?
Yeah. I'd like to be able to say like, I saw this huge opportunity off the bat. And the reality is it really stemmed from, a personal interest and personal pain that I had. As I mentioned, exercise, fitness, big part of my life. Always have known that that's what, keeps me healthy, physically, mentally. And also, seeing my parents and my in-laws kind of aging, how they're able to engage with my young kids is really quite different. And when I look at what's different about their lifestyles, a lot of it is exercise and is movement. My mother-in-law is like a CrossFit Games athlete, which is like amazing. And I just try to keep up with her. And it's clear to me that all the time and things that she and my father-in-law have put into exercise is really extending their health span and is able to give them this opportunity to do all of these things as they age. And so when I thought about starting a business, I knew that I wanted to do something in this ecosystem. I wanted to connect health, which for me really was, that fitness and exercise, with originally healthcare. I started, in the spring of 2023 now, exploring what would it take to get health insurance coverage for exercise specifically. And then what would it take to get health insurance coverage for other wellness interventions? And I learned a lot in that exploration. There are some great companies working in that space. But when it came down to it, it felt like maybe I wasn't the best suited to solve that particular problem. But I still really wanted to be in this area. So I kept digging and came across, HSAs and FSAs. And I think like most people, I had heard of them. I had actually had an HSA for a lot of years, kind of put it on the shelf, wasn't utilizing it. And when I actually did the research and figured out where and how this can be used, what are the exceptions, why don't people use this more? It really came down to, education. And then from a product perspective, it came down to infrastructure, like the process to using these funds today was really onerous. For most people, that meant paying out of pocket, knowing something was eligible and filing for reimbursement, or in some cases, actually having an appointment with their doctor to get, I'm sure we're going to talk about letters of medical necessity, getting that letter and submitting it for reimbursement. And oh, by the way, a lot of doctors aren't familiar with this, right? They've maybe submitted, an insurance authorization, but they haven't done this letter of medical necessity. It's not widely used. And so the process is just so much friction there and barriers to people actually being able to use these funds on things that drive health. And so once I kind of understood that problem, from there, the business opportunity was really clear. Okay, here's a problem we need to solve. I'll say the market opportunity is something that I continue to be really kind of impressed by, to be honest. The longer I'm in this business, the more opportunity I see and the bigger that market, because wellness is a huge consumer trend. It's growing. It spans a number of different categories. At the same time, the amount of money in HSAs and FSAs and the utilization of those accounts is growing. So more and more, we just see this as just a massive opportunity across the board.
That's amazing. Let's start with this, Sam. What is an HSA FSA?
Yes.
Let's describe it first, and then we'll take it from there.
For sure. So these are two different types of accounts. So HSAs, health savings accounts, and FSAs, flexible spending accounts. And we bucket them together, but there are a couple of key differences that are really helpful to understand. Both are offered often through your employer, and you often opt into them and set your contribution limits, during open enrollment or when you have a life event, when you're picking out your health insurance. So I think a lot of people think these are part of my health insurance, when actually they are tax-advantaged financial accounts that can be spent on specific health-related purchases. And who guides that is actually, the IRS, which I think a lot of people are surprised to say aren't their healthcare accounts. Why isn't it, the IRS involved? And it comes back to that tax-advantaged status. So to get back to the difference between these accounts, flexible spending accounts, those are actually owned by your employers, which is where that use it or lose it component comes in. So there's funds that are in those accounts, either from you or directly from your employer. And typically you need to use those funds within the plan year. So most commonly that's December 31st. And I think this is actually where a lot of the fear around these accounts stems from, is that everyone knows someone that has gone out on December 30th and bought a year's worth of contact lenses, or bought, sunglasses that they didn't need. I got a text from a friend that's like a bucket of sunscreen, right? Because they didn't know where or how to spend this. And you're trying to plan, what are my medical expenses going to be for the next year? And that's really, really hard, right? Health is unfortunately a little unpredictable at times. And so flexible spending accounts are maybe not so flexible, if I'm being honest. They're a little more prescriptive. And at the end of the year, any funds left in that account do go back to the employer. And so that's something to keep in mind. Health savings account, on the other hand, you need a high deductible health plan in order to qualify for an HSA, in order to be eligible. And the thinking behind these accounts, which are newer, I will say, compared with FSAs, is with a high deductible, you want consumers to be able to kind of have offset those healthcare costs. So that was kind of the original intent behind these accounts. And for that reason, they're owned by the individual. So if you change jobs or, year to year, those funds are going to roll over. They're going to stay with you. And because of that, you tend to see higher account balances in HSAs. The contribution limits tend to be quite a bit higher. I think on the high end right now it's about $8,500 versus an FSA is more, $3,300, $3,500. Let me pause there because that was a lot of information about these accounts. Are you following, Eric? What other things do you think the community would be interested to know here?
Well, I am following mainly because this has been such a point of interest. Like Jason Paul is a friend of ours, and I'm sure he'll be on this podcast eventually, but he's starting a whole new form of insurance based on, keeping people healthy, right? Preventatively. But he's really good at insurance. He's been in the industry for 25 years. So he sat down, he walked my wife and I through enrollment because she gets, she has a corporate insurance through her employment. I'm more on the entrepreneurial side. I don't have that kind of stuff readily accessible, but I got a freestyle education on it, and he was really good about doing it. But I think a lot of people like just knowing that these funds, for a lot of people generally who are employed, W-2 employees of most companies, probably have access to one or the other. Like, what percentage of people do you think in the United States have access to HSA?
Have access? I think it's roughly about a third.
Okay.
So it's a really sizable percent of the population. I think last I checked, there were about 70 million HSA and FSA accounts. And this might be like from last year or something, covering about 100 million individuals. HSAs can be used for dependents as well. And so when you think about this population, 100 million people, that's a lot of people. And what we've seen in particular, the HSA market has been growing a ton. To be honest, I think from a business perspective, 10 years ago, this would have been much less interesting just because high deductible health plans were not as popular. Today, they make up, I believe it's 40% of all health plans being offered in the US. And so you just have more people that are eligible for the accounts, more people opening the accounts today. And so that's where, as a business owner, you might think about, how do I enable people to use these? Because it is a really sizable pool of money at this point. I think $150 billion is sitting in these accounts right now.
That's crazy. It's crazy. It's such a huge opportunity. I think that's why there's so much excitement about it. I mean, let's start with this. So I'm Jim, the gym operator. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm thinking like, can this benefit me? Like who can benefit from this on our industry side? Like who can access this mass amount of dollars, this mass audience of people, 100 million people in the United States with all this money sitting aside that they're probably not knowing how to use? What kind of services can people use it for?
Yeah, I mean, broadly, we see anyone in what I'll call consumer wellness could benefit from this. And to break that down a little further, fitness is a huge category. That means in-studio fitness, that means equipment, that means apps. But moving through those wellness segments, that means sleep-related products. And we also see apps and coaching services. You look at the supplement space, which is massive. We also work in women's health. We work with wearables, in-home devices like, air purifiers, even things like that you wouldn't expect. Like I love the example of a mattress, because this actually came about from a very personal experience. My husband had a herniated disc like early on when I was starting this business, was in a lot of pain. And luckily that's passed. One of the first things the doctor said is, well, what's your work from home setup? What kind of desk chair do you have? And also, how old is your mattress? Because in terms of managing your pain and managing your symptoms, those are two things that are going to have a huge impact. And the thing with using these funds is that it really depends on the reason for a consumer using them. So there are some items like sunscreen, like contact lenses that we've talked about that are what the IRS calls always eligible. And we can get into more specifics there, but there's a whole category of things that could qualify. We call them dual purpose. And it really depends on the intent of the consumer. So if it is a medical need, that item, that purchase can become eligible, which really widens the aperture, I think, of what has historically been thought of as an eligible expense.
Yeah. Aperture. Good word, by the way.
Thanks.
What needs to happen? So something like a gym membership, or a mattress, or my desk chair. Like, what needs to happen to have that become a medical necessity and therefore qualify for HSA? Like, what is that process that happens? Because I mean, that's kind of what you guys do, right? I mean, we'll get into exactly what you guys do, but what does that process look like? What needs to shift?
Yeah. So fundamentally, what needs to happen, and this comes back to how these accounts are governed. So the IRS has a preordained kind of list of eligible expenses, section 2D, I believe, and it's very explicit around certain categories. Things that are not included are things like gym memberships or ergonomic desk chairs. So for those businesses to take advantage, the consumers buying that membership, they need to qualify through what's called a letter of medical necessity. And that is, in short, a doctor's note that says this individual has a condition that can benefit from this product. And, the specific things, whether you're treating it, you're managing it, there's some elements of prevention that come into play here. The consumer needs to get that doctor's note for that purchase to be considered a medical expense. And so, that's it at a very high level. How we at Flex enable businesses to streamline that process for consumers is, I think, what's really changing in the industry. Because to be honest, when I was doing my discovery in this market, this letter of medical necessity, that's existed as something consumers could use for a long time. The difference is people didn't know about it and the process was really onerous. And so that's where we as a technology provider come in and really allow, whether it's a gym owner or an e-commerce store, to streamline that process for consumers, ultimately driving more revenue and other impacts to the business.
Yeah. So let's walk through like an example. You mentioned Jim, the gym owner, right?
Yeah.
Operates a local, health club or maybe a regional chain. He's like, well, okay, this seems to make a lot of sense, but I'm busy, Sam. I got a lot of stuff going on. I got to worry about my staff. I got to worry about, retention. I got to worry about a build out. I got to worry about equipment, everything, maintenance, everything that goes into to running a gym. This sounds great. I would love to.
Yeah.
But it's difficult. So what needs to happen? Like what's the process?
Yeah. So I can speak to how it works with our business. So we kind of have two paths for someone like a studio owner or a multi-location owner. The first path is by enabling reimbursement. And I'll say up front that this is going to be your low lift path, but it's also going to be your lower impact path from what we see. And this is basically, the gym comes to Flex and says, hey, I'd like to enable my members who are eligible to get reimbursed from their HSA or FSA. And what we're going to do is basically set you up with the ability to offer, you're going to refer to Flex as your kind of telehealth provider here. So all you're going to need to do is give us a couple of details about the business. We're going to give you a custom link that you can share in your email, on your website, in printed materials that we're going to provide. And anytime one of your members says, hey, I'd like to use my HSA FSA for this purchase, you say, great, here's the link. And then we basically take care of the rest. What we're going to do is the person's coming to us, they're having that telehealth consultation, they're qualifying to use, they're getting the letter of medical necessity if they qualify. And then we're providing them, instructions on how to submit for reimbursement. So very, very low lift on the gym owner's part. We get these things that spun up in like a day or two. Now, the reason I say lower impact is because the onus is still on the consumer to do a lot of that work, right? They need to pay up front, they need to go through our flow, and they have to ultimately submit for reimbursement. And so, anytime, this is my like e-commerce hat coming on now, anytime you introduce friction, in a checkout, you're going to see more drop off. So it can be a really nice way to get up and running, to test interest from your community. But we believe at Flex, really the best path, the long-term path for the industry is actually as a method of payment at checkout. And so that's more akin to, think of any time you pay for something, you might see credit debit, you might see PayPal, you might see Affirm. We see HSA FSA as a payment method long-term. And so that's really where our, expertise and focus is about. Maybe we'd love to work with the gym owner. Often they actually don't control that part of their software, right? They're on a platform. And so, it's our hope and vision that, in the next several years, this will just be something that every platform has to offer because we see the consumer demand being there. And so in that situation, a gym owner basically calls their software platform and says, hey, I'd like to offer this. They kind of turn it on in the back end as an added, widget or payment method. And then consumers, the difference is now consumers at checkout can click that button, qualify for that letter of medical necessity, and actually use their HSA and FSA cards directly. So these accounts, they give you a debit card. More and more consumers we see actually using that. And then once you do that, you're done. There's no reimbursement. We send you all the paperwork so you have it on file in the case of an audit or anything like that. But it's so smooth and it's a great customer experience. And ultimately, that's what's going to drive the business impact for the studio.
Awesome. And talk to me about the qualification process for that letter of medical necessity. Like what goes into that?
Yeah, this is something. So I'll just be upfront and say it's not, Sam at Flex assigning, rubber stamping all of these folks. When consumers come through our flow, we partner very closely with telehealth providers. So these are NPs or MDs that are actually making that clinical designation. And what we'll do is on the front end, we're collecting relevant medical information based on the product that you're looking to buy. So in the case of a gym membership, exercise is one of our most widely, I'll say, used and also like qualifying products, because every study shows that exercise is helpful. Even I just read a study on concussions where they were like, they used to say don't move, and now it's like you should move, right? It just seems like exercise is so beneficial. So in that case, there's a very broad set of conditions that an individual could qualify with. If you're thinking, if we're looking at something like, a supplement or something in the red light therapy space or an ergonomic desk chair, that qualifying condition does change. And so, in our flow, we're very thoughtful to collect and screen folks that actually map to, the product itself. So you're not getting, just because I have, I don't know, a sprained ankle, I don't know if I need a red light therapy face mask. You know what I mean? So we want to make sure that we're really aligning with that intent of that letter of medical necessity. But yeah, all it is a chat based. So you'll just have a, no scheduling, no video, kind of a chat based interaction. And at the end of it, you'll find out if you qualify and be able to pay right away.
And then how do you set up your commercial relationship with, like, we'll keep it on the same thing. Jim, the gym owner, owns a regional health club. How does that work with you guys?
Yeah, it really depends on the model of engagement. For the reimbursement side, a lot of the fees are passed to the consumer. In most cases, we do have some studios that say, you know what, this is a great acquisition channel. This is a great retention channel. We're going to front those costs. But more often than not, consumers are kind of paying out of pocket to be able to use these funds. In the case that we're doing HSA, FSA payment, that business model looks a lot more like an alternative payment method. And so that typically tends to fall to the merchant.
Got it. And then what have you seen, like, from, I imagine there's so many ways of, like, it's not just you just sign up for this as a gym, but also you need to properly notify your gym clients. You need to notify someone who's maybe on your list and who's been thinking about joining. So, like, what have you seen from an acquisition and revenue standpoint? Like, what are some of the success stories here?
Yeah, there's like so many different facets of this to dive into. I think for the studio itself, I actually see the most impact around retention. Just if you think of an in-person gym or boutique studio, it is a little bit of like geo-fenced, right? Like, you're not going to attract someone from 50 miles away because you offer this method, right? So you are, potentially getting some net new customers in your target community. But more than that, what we see is when people actually switch to using their HSA FSA for the recurring membership, they're going to stay with you longer. They tend to see this as a separate pool of funds. When they're looking at budgeting or where they need to tighten the belt, this is a separate category. And so it doesn't get impacted and cut quite so quickly as compared with maybe a regular spend. We also see folks on these payment methods like purchasing more ancillary services. So whether that's a private training session or a nutrition coaching session or things like that. Because again, I think the consumer behavior here is it's a separate and like health, I should be spending this on health kind of pool of funds. So that's what what I tend to see in a studio model are those types of metrics. We work with a lot of also, D2C, direct to consumer, whether it's apps or physical products, e-commerce brand. And there, we tend to look at acquisition for new customers. We look at checkout rate conversion, things more at that part of the funnel.
Yeah. I mean, on the e-commerce side, it's been like, so I work with Dark Horse Rowing and we're signing up for Flex right now. And just for like the ability to, at a $30 a month subscription, right? For something like that, which is, a rowing app, it makes a ton of sense. I mean, that's just money. Like I think the consumer looks at it as money that needs to be spent, right? Like they need to spend it somehow, some way, right? So they might as well spend it on things that they like, or they feel that, brings value to their life or moves them on a path towards a healthier life. It's really interesting. And then what about like in the gym setting is like when someone's in and you mentioned, ancillary services like personal training or maybe small group training, but what about like products, like maybe like, if there's a juice bar or if there's like, they sell hyper ice stuff, like what about those types of things?
Yeah, definitely. It really depends on the additional services. So there are things like actually high price is a great example because a lot of those products are actually, they don't need a letter of medical necessity. They're eligible kind of out of the box, as I say. And so the way that Flex works is we're actually able to at checkout identify, at the product level, what needs a letter and what doesn't. And so if you're only buying those types of items, we're not going to make you go through and get a doctor's note for it. We're going to allow you to check out right away. So, which is pretty cool. And so if you're thinking about, you're a large gym and you're building out your juice bar, you're building out your apparel section, or you're building out all of these other kind of components, which we see more and more, right? Fitness is becoming like a hub for wellness. So I think more and more like services are coming together where our job is to make you not worry about compliance and eligibility or anything like that, right? Like, plug us in, let us do that work. And as a business, you don't really need to think about it. And we're making sure that your consumers are checking out for eligible items, things like, apparel and whatnot. Those aren't going to qualify, but that's okay. We're still able to get folks to be able to use their tax advantage funds on the majority of those purchases.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. I mean, if people go to your website withflex.com, like they can see from the consumer angle and then the business standpoint of like, I breeze through like the consumer standpoint. I send it to my wife. I'm like, look at all the money where we could spend all your money on. It's her money, right? But like, this is cool. A lot of stuff that I didn't know we could buy now. Yeah, it's really interesting. Yeah, and then so let's talk about like when. Same thing, like a health club operator signs up for this. How do you get the word out? Do you make suggestions for them to like send an email blast or put it on the website, or like what's the best way to actually leverage it once gyms and health clubs are signed up?
Well, absolutely. And I think a big part of our job is partnering with those merchants and helping them be successful with this, right? Like that's our whole business. So yeah, it really depends on what the business is that we're working with and what they've seen work with their audience. Some gyms have a very engaged, newsletter following. Some of that's on social. Sometimes it's in person, signage. It could be training the staff, at a gym location. And so we do have a lot of kind of best practices that we've seen and assets that we share, but ultimately we'll come in and work with the owner or the manager, whoever is the main point of contact, and understand how they like to educate and what's been successful, maybe in other initiatives. And then we'll tailor, what we provide those folks to those channels.
That's a huge value. I mean, I don't think that can be understated or overstated. Like it's one thing to sign up, but it's one thing to educate your membership or the potential members or whoever your consumers are like on, okay, this is actually here and here's how to use it. Like you mentioned, friction is a big problem because a lot of people still don't really understand. Like I know my wife's HSA card has sat in her wallet for a very long time. Same thing around November. We're like, oh God, like what do we do with it, right? If we even remember.
I'm impressed it's in her wallet, to be honest. Like that's your wife.
I think it is. I know it's not in my wallet. Because I would spend it, but she has one. That's the whole point. So that's a huge value that you guys have there. I want to get a little bit because talking about where this can head to, right? Like the direction of 3, 4, 5 years from now. I mean, it's a very interesting time. You and I were both at HFA. It felt very optimistic. It was full. They had like over 10,000 people attending again, which is pre-pandemic numbers. But it's the industry has changed so much. And now, this has been a topic that's come up numerous times as we have new administration in the White House. There seems to be more focus or at least rhetoric around the health of the nation, which is good. How that plays out, we'll see. But, where do you think this is? Is this just an opening for something bigger? Like, what's your vision, let's say 5 years from now, 2030? Like, how do you see the integration of healthcare into fitness and wellness and, health insurance and more HSAs and more funds and things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I see a lot of positive momentum, in this category. And that's both out of the current administration, but also I think just the general, like, why is that happening? I think consumers are really much more aware of health and how really health is a lot of lifestyle choices, right? It's very rare that I have a conversation with someone about health and they're talking about at my annual doctor's visit, we talked about all these things. that's always going to be a component. And, I've had the privilege of having some great doctors when I needed them, but more and more people are recognizing that, that the actions I take every single day and the lifestyle I have and the products I use really does have an impact, not just on health, but health span. And so I think that momentum is pushing, whether it's this administration or the next, to think about consumer-driven healthcare in a way that we haven't really seen before. And so we're very optimistic. Everything that we're seeing is around expanding access to HSAs, to new populations, to increasing the contribution limits of these accounts, to maybe broadening the scope of what's eligible, without a letter of medical necessity, which, from my perspective, that's a great, kind of workaround. That's a great path to make things more accessible. Wouldn't it be great if all this stuff that really made you healthy, like you could just use your cards on? Like that would be amazing. And just, again, lowering friction, making it better for consumers and better for their health. So yeah, we're really encouraged to see all of the dialogue around this category. And I think, yeah, we'll see what actually ends up landing. But so far, it feels like there's going to be a lot of expansion in this category.
Yeah, and it's I've talked about this so many times. It's just we need a revamp of the whole healthcare system, and I do believe fundamentally that's going to start from the ground up. Like, insurance providers are motivated and aligned to make profit, right? That's what they need to do. Whether you agree with that, that's just the way it is. But once it kind of starts from the consumer level and starts to work up, like this is what consumers want, this is what they're looking for, this is where they want to put their money. That starts to change the conversation. It's difficult. I mean, we've been talking about the FIT Act here for many decades within our industry, and I hope it still passes. But I think, there's other angles maybe we have to really consider, is like stuff like this. And, talking to Dr. Gloria Winters, who's the Chief Health Officer at YMCA, and her vision for how, the health clubs will be at the forefront of healthcare. Like these are all small steps that, as they start to combine over time, I think is a very, very encouraging opportunity for the industry that we've been in for a long time.
Yeah, absolutely. It does feel like at this moment there's, we're kind of at an inflection point. Like maybe this has been growing for some time, but now it does feel like there's a different energy behind these conversations that I think hasn't existed in the past. And so hopefully, we can turn that energy into some real action and help folks, access the products and services that they see driving their health the most.
Awesome. As an industry, Sam, how can we help you? And by what I mean by that is like, what's one of the challenges you're facing as a business right now? Is it, staffing? Are you looking for investment? Are you looking for growth or partnerships? Like what's key to you? And if people are going to reach out, what would you like to hear from them about?
Yeah. I mean, we just want to enable as many businesses and as many consumers to leverage this opportunity as possible. So if you're a studio, if you're a franchise owner, if you sell an app or something on e-commerce, like please do reach out. Even if you're not sure, even if you're reaching out and you're like, do we qualify? Like, could this work for us? A lot of what we do is education, is consulting during our process to help make sure that this is a really good fit for your business. So, and we're always surprised by who comes in the door. And again, that gives us more and more use cases. We feel that pull from the market with new types of businesses putting their hand up and saying, I think this might apply to us. And we look at it, we go, actually, yeah, it really does. And then it unlocks, huge categories. So the biggest thing we're looking for is just to meet, more merchants that are really interested in learning about this opportunity. Yeah. That's top of mind for me every day.
Yeah. I mean, in my mind, I think of like dozens of partnerships for you guys as well. I mean, from, software companies to, consulting agencies to whatever it is, there's a million different angles here. I mean, you guys are really well positioned to basically align with everybody. You can partner with everybody within the industry. So that's nice, right? From a sales strategy, good from you.
I love being in this business for a lot of reasons. If we're successful, hopefully we drive health impact. That's like, number one and top of mind. But also, we if we're successful as a business, that means that the merchants we've worked with have been successful, that they've actually seen new customers and retention, acquisition, which is great. And why did they see that? It's because consumers, like, we actually solved a problem for the consumer. We made it much easier to deploy these funds when and how they want to. And so, I've been in a lot of different types of business as we started this conversation around my career, and that, alignment isn't always so clear. And so it just makes our job like so enjoyable to actually know that, if we do well, then the whole ecosystem does well.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay. So people want to, obviously with flex.com, that's your website. If people want to reach out to you personally, Sam, is there a way they can get a hold of you, or where would you like them to go?
Yeah, absolutely. We have a form on withflex.com. You can also, find me on LinkedIn, and I'm pretty responsive to messages there. Just Sam O'Keefe, look up Flex. It should pop right up. And then also email if you want to reach out, hello@withflex.com. And that, we're growing a ton, but I'm still going to see those emails. So feel free to shoot a message over there.
Well, Sam, thank you so much for joining me. It's been really educational. I think this is something that hopefully people look at as like a fundamental introduction into HSA, FSA, obviously the solutions that you provide, and they look into it. That's all we want. It's just give it a couple minutes, see if the opportunity is right for you, but it probably is. And really, really cool stuff you're building. So thanks for joining me. Ladies and gentlemen, Sam O'Keefe.
Thanks so much, Eric.